Michael, you can hear us. Thanks for joining.
Yeah, I can hear you actually. I don't think
Great.
I need these. They might not be working, so.
All right.
I can hear you, so.
Thanks for the time this afternoon. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. You guys have rain all day today.
Yeah, it's been one of those kind of New England days. So just double checking everybody. Is this us? Are we missing anyone from the different entities?
Lisa's here, Mike's here.
Yeah, I think we're all set.
Okay. All right, Steve, we just need you to virtually gavel us in.
Mhm.
Okay, let me unmute. Well, as acting chair, I'd like to call to order the Tuesday, October 13th, 2020 Audit Committee meeting. Annette, will you call the roll?
Yes, Steve Grande.
Here.
Present. Okay, committee of one. Thank you, Steve.
Well done, Steve. Thanks. Michael, we'll turn it
Took
over
me a while.
to you.
Great. Well, thank you all for having me. So it's going to be myself and Lisa will be going through both the required communications and then the financial statements for this year's audit. So if I can, I'm going to, would it be all right if I share my screen and kind of walk through the required communication? That works
Sure.
for everyone?
Mm-hmm. Go ahead. Mm-hmm.
All right. All right, so hopefully everyone can see that now. So we have a few things that we're required to kind of go through with kind of those charged with governance. A few things, one under U.S. government auditing standards, as well as in this case, the government auditing standards were required to test internal controls in addition to going through the financial statement audit. So it's really kind of two key components to the auditor's report. One is the financial statement audit report, where there's an unmodified opinion. That's a clean opinion. And then there's, in the back, there's an internal control report. And basically that report, we modify if something comes to our attention during testing. But in this case, there weren't. So there's no material weaknesses or significant deficiencies identified in that report. And then we did apply certain limited procedures. There's two other components in addition to the financial statements for required supplementary information. There is management's discussion and analysis at the beginning of the financial statements. And then at the back, there are pension and OPEB schedules and notes to the schedules. Those things are required supplementary information for an entity such as Springfield Tech. We are independent. There's no relationships that we're aware of that would impact our independence. And we don't provide any management advisory services. An example of that is the investment advising. In terms of non-attest services, so kind of other things we do outside of the financial statements, we assisted in preparing the financial statements, and we will assist in preparing the single audit report at a later date. That single audit report really relates to the federal funds. So in addition to student financial aid this year, there's some CARES money that I'll mention in a bit too. That piece, the guidance as to how to actually audit those programs or that program surrounding CARES isn't out yet. So that single audit really isn't ready at this point in time. As far as management's responsibilities, there's really no material new accounting policies. There was one that was adopted, GASB 84, but it didn't have a material impact on the financial statements. In terms of accounting estimates, you can see them on the screen there. Every set of financial statements has estimates built in it. Two big ones to point out here, the net pension and net OPEB liability. Those estimates are actually done at the state level. And then the total liability is then driven down to the individual institutions. with that being said, there was a prior period adjustment for related to the OPEB liability. Basically, the state in, I think it was mid-August, alerted us to an error in their calculation of the prior year OPEB number. So we evaluated kind of the dollar amount and the timing of it and said it's going to make the most sense rather than going back and looking at potentially reissuing prior year financials, but rather restating prior year balances in the current year financial statements, because we knew we'd be issuing these financial statements today. The other significant transaction really would be the higher education money. Sometimes it's referred to as CARES money, HERF money, whichever way. All of you folks, I'm sure, have been discussing it and talking about it. And of this money, just under $1 million was awarded and spent during FY20 as emergency grants to students. We're happy to report, there were no disagreements with management or anything of that nature. As far as working with other auditors, it's really communication. We do the, as O'Connor drew, we do the audit now for the foundation. So it's really working with the Assistance Corp audit team, as well as, again, where as I said, on the pension and OPEB, those audits are done at the state level. So KPMG does those audits. So we work kind of in conjunction with them and get the reports from them in order to be used in these financial statements. And then written communications, it's really just the engagement letter at the beginning that discusses what we're going to do in terms of procedures. And then management representation letter at the end that basically says we gave you all the information you were looking for and provided you the necessary documents. As far as risks, there are risks presumed under auditing standards. So under every audit, this set of risks is listed where it's really management override, revenue recognition. Those things are presumed under every audit. As far as the organization specific risks, it's really the, general education trends, there's decreasing number of graduates, obviously COVID-19, turnover in management, and then related party transactions, because again, you have two component units that, you kind of work in conjunction with. The last slide to kind of go over is this is just an upcoming pronouncement. This was actually delayed a year, this GASB pronouncement. So this is about leases. So if you're familiar on the commercial side, really what they're trying to do is take leases that are right now treated as off the balance sheet and put them on the balance sheet. So if you look at the operating leases in that footnote, you'll kind of see that and kind of give you a gauge in terms of, potential dollar impact. But basically what you do is you would actually be recording the liability for the future minimum payments, and then you'd have a corresponding asset or right to use asset on the books. And the only other thing to kind of mention is in terms of timeline, typically these financial statements are due October 15th. The state did give a 2-week extension this year to October 30th. They kind of let us know about that probably a couple of weeks ago at this point. But again, we're kind of well within our range here in terms of, voting on and trying to get the financial statements finalized at this point. So with this, I will turn it over to Lisa, who's an audit manager, been with the firm for, I'll just say 10 plus years, Lisa. And then, and she can kind of take it from here and walk you right through the financial statements. Any questions as we go, please feel free to chime in and ask, or you can wait till the end, whatever you're more comfortable with.
Okie dokie. Hi, everyone. So this was my first year on Springfield Tech. I have been with O'Connor and Drew for 10 plus years, as Mike said. And I do have experience with actually other community colleges, but this was my first year on STIC, and I did have a great experience. And I like to think that the college was in great hands with me as the manager. So pages, the first 3 pages of the financial statements are independent auditors report. Pretty much boilerplate information in here. If any other auditor were to do this, it would look pretty similar to this. It lists out our responsibilities and management's responsibilities. The second page of the report is where you can find our opinion. We did express an unmodified opinion on the financials, which is the best you can get. So A+, basically. We did have to include an emphasis of matter paragraph in here this year, and that's only due to the OPEB restatement. So we do have to make readers aware that there was a restatement due to that OPEB. Pages 4 through 20 are the management's discussion and analysis. That is unaudited by OCD. It's basically an overview of the financial statements prepared by management and kind of provides information, facts, things of that nature about the college that may interest anybody that's reading the financial statements that is unfamiliar with the college. So I'm going to skip over to page 21 of the financials, which is your statements of net position. You'll see at the bottom there, your total assets and deferred outflows of resources were up about 5.7 million from last year. That's fairly consistent, but one of the major factors in that increase is your capital assets of 78 million at 6/30/20. You did have a significant amount of additions during the year. A lot of them were basically some renovations and masonry work done to various buildings around the campus and some electrical power system updates. That was a big one. That was like $3.5 million. So you did have some hefty spending there. The next page is your total liabilities. And just like your assets increased by 5.7 million, so did your liabilities, deferred inflows of resources in net position. And that's mostly due to your increase in net position, which was about 6.7 million, and which ties into the next page, page 22, your statements of revenues and expenses. You'll see at the bottom of the page there, net increase, decrease in net position. The increase was 6.7 million this year. Your total operating revenues were up about 1.8, largely due to the grants and contracts line item. You did have a few new grants and contracts this year that weren't there last year. A major one was the Department of Early Ed Career Pathways Grant, Skills Capital Grant, Higher Ed Safety and Security Grant, and some of those were the major increases in that grants and contracts line item. Your total operating expenses were down 2.3. They're at 70.2 million there, halfway down the page. And basically, that's like a perfect recipe. Your operating revenues were up and your operating expenses were down. It's like perfect. Some of that decrease in the operating expenses is due to that 3.5 month roughly shutdown of campus. So if campus was shut down, you didn't have to do as much maintenance of buildings and things like that. So you did have a net operating loss, which is so typical of every community college of about halfway down the page of 37 million. But your non-operating revenues and expenses make up for that. Obviously, your state appropriations increase that amount. And we did break out, so the requirement is that federal grants line item is the HERF funds, or the emergency relief funding of the 991,000. It's required to be broken out as non-operating, while the expenses related to it are broken out in operating. Kind of funny, but that's the way they want it to be done. So then you'll notice your capital appropriations. They've decreased by about 5.5 million this year, but it was because last year you received so much due to that the building 19 was getting renovated, and a lot of that 12.3 was almost all made up of funds for that. And so where they gave you so much last year, they decreased that this year. Now, usually, so page 23 is your statements of changes in net position. Normally, in the past, that's combined with your statements of revenues and expenses. But this year, because of the prior period adjustment due to OPEB, we have to break this out separately to show the change and how it impacted your net position. So you'll see that there's a line item, prior period adjustment, C note 2, for $146,000 decrease in your net unrestricted net position. That's the OPEB adjustment. And then basically in total, it ties back to your statements of net position of the 86.6 million. Page 24 is your cash flow. You'll see about halfway down the page, you did have a decent sized increase in your cash of about 2.2 million, 2.3 million. Basically, the cash flow just shows where your increases in cash were and where your decreases in cash were. So where the cash came in and where the cash went out. I wasn't going to go into too much detail of it, but if anybody has any questions afterwards, I can definitely answer whatever you have. Page 25 and 26 both relate to the combining of the component units that tie back in total to previous pages. We did audit STCC, and we did audit the foundation. So I wasn't going to go into too much detail about these numbers. We could go into more detail about the foundation at the end if you would like. But all of this information came directly from each of those component unit financials. So page 27 to 67 are the notes to the financials. And note 1, which is your summary of significant accounting policies, spans from page 27 to 35. So instead of going through everything, I thought I would just kind of touch on like the changes that happened in note 1. Right on page 27, there's 3 paragraphs there that are new, and they all relate to basically COVID-19. We kind of touch on the fact that the college transitioned to distance learning, and we talk about the total funds that were awarded. So the 3.8 million is disclosed. And then we also talk about how 991,000 was spent in just grants to students. So the way that's going to work is half of that 3.8 million is required to be distributed to students, and the other half can be used for institutional funding. And you have not spent any of the institutional funds in FY20, so they'll be used in FY21. If we go to page 33, all this is the exact same as last year, except when you get to page 33, you'll see that there's an adoption of the new governmental accounting pronouncement. Mike touched on it. GASB Statement 84 relates to fiduciary activities. It had an immaterial effect on the financials. So I wasn't going to go into too much detail, but you did adopt it, and I thought you should know about it, but it didn't have a material effect on the financials at all. And then new governmental accounting pronouncements are required to be included on the financial statements, but really only one of them, like Mike mentioned before, GASB 87, is really going to have a material effect on these financials. And since it's been pushed and delayed, it's actually going to be effective for FY 2022. So we have a little while on this, and I'll point out what impact it'll have in a couple of pages now. And I can answer questions afterwards. I was kind of just going to skip around a little bit and not go like note by note, but again, kind of touch on what I think is kind of important. Page 35 illustrates the prior period adjustment. So you can see there that it shows what balances were as previously reported in last year's financials, then the correction of the error and where it hit, and then what is reported at June 30th, 19 in these financials that I'm talking about. You can see the $146,000 that increased expenses. And then you did have the OPEB liability did increase by about $844,000 as a result of this adjustment. And again, it was all basically dictated from the state. So it's kind of out of your control pretty much. Page 39. I did mention before your capital assets. I mentioned some of your major additions, but I did want to point out that you did have some reclassifications. So some items that were in construction in progress last year were reclassified and put into service. So they'll start being depreciated starting in FY20. And the 2 major items in that 2.1 million are a roof to building 2, and building 17 had some work being done to it. I think some like brickwork or masonry work. So both of those items were finished and put into service FY20. Page 42, the long-term debt, note 7, is basically just a bridge from one year to the other. But I did want to point out that even though pension and OPEB are out of your control, it did decrease. And there were reductions in the note payable, your compensated absence, and workers' compensation. So all debt basically was paid down during the year. The next page, page 43, starts STCC. So page 43 to 47 are all STCC debt related. It's basically a description of and detail behind the $6 million of STCC debt. I did take these notes directly from the STCC financials that were audited by another accounting firm. So it's the verbatim their wording. Then when you skip to page 47 of the financials, it begins, so pension and OPEB. So pension and OPEB notes range, they go from page 47 to page 60, and they're all pension and OPEB related. Basically, these two disclosures are taken ultimately directly from reports that we get from the state, ultimately unaltered by us, except with some numbers that we changed because it relates to you and not another place or another institution. I usually don't go into too much detail about the pension and OPEB. Mike's the expert on pension and OPEB, actually, so he can answer any questions anybody has at the end.
Expect to be a reach, I think.
So after say, so 61, the one thing I wanted to point out on 61, note 12, your operating leases. Actually it's 62, sorry. Page 62, you have about, at June 30th, 2020, you have about $1.9 million in operating leases that are going to become due in the next few years. So basically what would happen is that amount is going to become an asset and a liability on your balance sheet. Not exactly that amount, but something pretty close to that amount would, if we were to get that GASB 87 right now, that's what would happen. It may increase or decrease, over the next couple of years, but that's what the effect would be. Page 65 of the financials, note 16, your unrestricted net position. I did just want to point out that, you do have this disclosure in here that illustrates what the board has designated each of all of the unrestricted net position for. And yeah, I thought that was important. And then, so page 67 is another change, basically. Usually there's no subsequent event footnote, but because of everything that's going on right now with COVID-19, blah, 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 I'm sure everybody's sick of hearing that word. We did include a subsequent event footnote, basically just to address the uncertainty of it all and the college's move to primarily remote learning. You'll note that about 80% of its courses now for the fall 2020 semester are taught online. Okay, so next, page 68 to 75 is the required supplementary information. It all relates to pension and OPEB. Again, all this information is pulled directly from reports provided from the state. If you have any questions, we can surely answer them. And then after the required supplementary information, the last 2 pages of the financials is our auditor's report on compliance and internal control, where we don't actually express an opinion, but we do disclose that the testing we performed as part of our audit resulted in the determination by OCD that STIC is in compliance with government auditing standards. In our internal controls testing, we had no findings. And those are your FY20 financials in a nutshell. So if anybody has any questions, I can answer what I can.
All right, thanks, Lisa.
You're welcome.
So John, I think we're going to move on to Karen Smith now, who will provide highlights of the financials for the STIC assistance.
Let me just get a couple comments, Steve, so that we can kind of carry them for Lisa and Mike. Given all the, you see the landscape. I'm not asking you to speak on behalf of the other community colleges in Mass that you audit, but can you give us a perspective, a context, if you will, for STIC's OPEB position and our unrestricted net position as well? I think there's a slight unusualness, Mike, to the extent that you can comment on that. And I want to make sure that our trustees will understand that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, I believe STIC is the only, or I'll say one of the very few anyway, if not the only, that has a positive unrestricted net position. The other community colleges, primarily it's due to, they have a larger allocation of that pension and OPEB liability. And basically that is pulled directly when it goes on the books, it comes directly out of the unrestricted net position. So, if you think about unrestricted net position, essentially it's like retained earnings on if we're a private company. To show positive there is a very it's a very good indicator. You know, when you look at ratios and things like that, comparing other institutions, that's a pretty significant driver.
I know Steve is there somewhere. One of the things for my team that we'll want to convey forward, right, is our unrestricted net position, right, is a touch over 10 million. The fact that we might be the only community college in Mass with that, because this is the question around reserves. How much reserves does the college have? At least audited, it says 10.2. We can argue about the OPEB piece, Mike, sort of in another world about whether it's ever going to be applicable or not. And ours goes to then 15 million. But the fact that we have any reserves to speak of in this sense, from an audited perspective, I think is an asset. It's actually a strength and a position for us. I say this to my team that we want to protect. You know, obviously we're having many conversations about the not just the fiscal health, but the sort of programmatic array at the college. I want to just be sure that we feel fully informed from an audited perspective about that.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, you know, the balance sheet as a whole is a very healthy balance sheet again, and I'm with you on the pension and OPEB, what that really could mean. But really, the things that are within the college's control, really, you know, I mean, it presents a very healthy balance sheet. You know, I mean, having investments, you know, ultimately not needing to be used. I know sometimes they're used for cash flow, you know, maybe before the financial aid draw comes down. But really, at the end of the day, if you're then replenishing it 3 months later, then it's truly just timing more than anything else. But, you know, to have, you know, 14+ million in, you know, an investment account, I think kind of speaks volumes too.
Appreciate that. I'm not sure if my team otherwise has questions that will help inform or otherwise frame. So didn't mean to interrupt there. So Karen, do you need to also hold the floor for a few minutes?
Yes, I do.
Great.
I would like to share my screen as well, if that's possible, and just go through a few highlights in the Tech Parks financial statements, just so if you'd like me to do that. I can just do it over a few minutes.
Great.
Yes, go ahead. You can share your screen.
Okay. Here we go. So we are in the process of finalizing the financial statements. This is still a draft, but they are in the process of being finalized as we speak. I won't reiterate the format of the financial statements in terms of having the MD&A and being under government auditing standards is the same as for the community college. So I won't go into detail there. We do have an unmodified opinion, and there are no significant deficiencies or material weaknesses in internal controls. If you go to on the statements of financial position, there are a couple of highlights here. The Tech Park did have a very good year. So cash and cash equivalents, you've got $1.5 million, which is an increase of 1.3 million. The major one of the reasons for the increase, though, is you did receive the state appropriation receivable of $2 million. That was for capital expenditures, but the vast majority of that was also expended on capital assets. Your capital assets had a net increase of $701,000. The actual fixed assets purchased were $1.328 million during the year. The other notable thing on the balance sheet would be your long-term debt. You had debt repayments of $709,000. And I'll go in a little bit that's more than the usual and the required debt repayments. I'll go into that in a little bit of detail in a minute. If you go to the statements of revenues, expenses, and changes in net position, Your operating revenues, you had an increase of $268,000. For the most part, your operating revenue stayed stable. You had other revenue included, which other revenue is much higher this year. It's $322,000. And the reason for that being higher is that you received a termination fee from Liberty Mutual of $313,000. And that's also why the debt repayments were higher, because you use that termination fee to pay off certain portions of long-term debt. So it's, and that was received in June. So Liberty Mutual was reducing its space drastically. So they had about 60,000 square feet of space going down to about 6,000 square feet or so. And they will be paying their lease payments through June of 2021. So additional payments from Liberty Mutual will be coming in through June of 2021. And that termination was due to, they've determined that people can work from home. So it is a kind of a direct result of COVID. Other notable items, you have a decrease in total operating expenses of $134,000. And that the main, your operating expenses, your utilities decreased by $200,000, predominantly electricity. And that is a result of less occupancy in the space during the shutdown. So just utilize less electricity expense. Under non-operating revenues and expenses, you have revenue related to your state appropriation of $1.4 million, almost $1.5 million. The remainder is sitting in deferred revenue because there's some fixed assets that slid into fiscal year 2021. And you had an increase in net position of 1.6 million. So a nice healthy increase in net position. Your net position at the end of the year is $4.5 million. The cash flow statement, which is just shows the big highlight there is you've got that large increase in cash of 1.3 million. So you've got cash and cash equivalents of 1.5 million at the end of the year. A good portion of that will go to pay for, you've got some liabilities related to accounts payable for your fixed asset purchases for some of those. The other, I won't go into detail in the footnotes, but I did want to highlight a footnote. There's two things I'm going to highlight. There is, so we've got the same detail on the notes payable. The one thing I wanted to highlight is note 6, leases. So this is the required disclosure on the revenue coming due from long-term leases, revenue coming from long-term leases for the next 5 years and thereafter. If you notice in fiscal 2021, you're still at $3.3 million. Fiscal 2022, you've got a big drop to $2.3 million. And the reason for that is, the primary reason for that is the early termination of the Liberty Mutual lease for a good portion of their space. So they're just retaining a small portion of their space. So that's why you've got that decreased. The other note to be of note is we've got a contingency disclosure in regarding the added a contingency regarding COVID-19 and the fact that there's still, some uncertainty going forward as to ultimate economic impacts. And in this footnote, we're disclosing that that a tenant modified its lease to reduce his lease space. So that is reflected in the footnote on note 6 with the rental income in the future. So that's just an important thing to note going forward. And I understand that the tech park is working hard to release that space to a different tenant. And then we've got the report required by government auditing standards on internal control over financial reporting and compliance. And as I say, we didn't have any material weaknesses or significant deficiencies in internal control. And we had no disagreements with management. Are there any questions that I can answer?
Appreciate that, Karen.
Thank you.
Nanette, can you bring up the agenda again? So Steve has, I think, the motions.
I have the motion in
Oh,
front
okay.
of me,
Great.
John, if I
Great.
need it. There's just the one, correct? Or are
Yeah.
we going to vote on, can we vote on all of the financials with one vote, or do we need to take them separately?
I think it's with one vote.
I think it's, yeah, the as
It's
presented.
one vote. Mhm.
Yeah, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay, so why don't I read the motion?
Mhm.
The motion reads that the Springfield Technical Community College Board of Trustees Audit Committee pursuant to the provision of Section 22, Chapter 15A moves to recommend to the Board of Trustees Committee on Ways and Means the approval of the fiscal year 2020 financial statements and audit as presented. Is there a motion? Is there a second? I second the motion. All in favor? Nanette, would you take the roll?
Steve Grande,
Aye.
thank you.
The motion passes.
Mhm.
No additional discussion, I imagine, so.
Thanks for that, Steve.
John, so we move on to any other business at this point?
I believe so. And then we can vote to adjourn.
Sure. Is there any other business, any further discussion by any of the members? All right, I will make a motion and second for the adjournment of the audit committee meeting. Nanette, will you take the roll?
Steve Grande,
Aye.
thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Well done. We'll tip right over into Ways and Means then. Thank you, everybody. Really
Thank
appreciate it.
you.
All right. So, John, shall I just call to order? Do we have everyone that we need? do you
They're
think, at this
filtering in
point?
right now. Yep.
Yep.
We'll be sure that we've got the quorum too.
Mhm.
All right.
Hi, Betty. Thanks for your patience. We're just finishing up the audit. I see Janae and Maurice. I think Vicky and Jeff we have on the phone. Thanks for your patience as we finished up the audit.
No problem. Just wanted to make sure I could get in.
Yes, yes. Is Eric Hagopian on? Me. We're just missing Eric, Dr. Cook.
And we need 5 for our quorum, right?
Yes. Mhm.
Okay.
John, I had to step out for a second. Am I ready to call to order? Do we have who we need
I just
for
want to,
quorum?
let me just see. Do we have, Vicky, do we have you on the phone?
Yes, I'm here.
Oh, great. Check in, we have Betty, but Betty, are you on internal, external?
Yeah, Betty's listening. Mhm.
Okay. So we do need Eric then, is that right? To
Yes.
quorum? Okay.
Do we not have Mac or Mary Kate?
No.
No, both have sent their regrets. So for our trustees, a sort of point of process, Steve filled in for Mac on the audit committee. It's a committee of one. Traditionally, it's been the chair of Ways and Means. That helped move the audit forward. So there is a motion to accept the audited financials. We do need a quorum though for Ways and Means. I've just texted Eric Hagopian to see if he is able to confirm. We did have him down as a yes for this evening.
Will he make our quorum if he's available?
He is, he will.
Okay.
You know, one of the things I wish we had a parliamentarian. What we may be able to do is have Vicky join the committee to make the quorum as a trustee, since she is a trustee.
Have Betty join the committee.
Sorry, Betty.
Vicky's on it.
Right. And Steve,
Let's wait and see if you get a response from Eric. I know both Mary Kate and Mac are away, but I guess I could reach out to them and just see if by chance either of them can join.
They both confirmed within the last hour, Vicky, to Nanette and I, that they were not able to join us tonight.
Okay.
And they were aware of the quorum consideration.
Okay.
So you know, maybe I know we're thinking out loud here, but Nanette with Steve, that gives us 4. Does that get us the quorum actually?
That gives us 5. Yeah, with Steve.
Well, Steve, Maurice, Vicky, and Jeff, right, are the committee proper. I know we have Betty
And Maurice and Janae.
and Janae. My goodness. Okay, sorry. I think I was belaboring this then.
Oh, Janae is here too.
Certainly. Sorry, Janae. So I think we're good. I think Nanette, you're in position to call the roll then.
Okay.
Steve, let me turn it over to you to again officially call to order. You're on mute, Steve.
I'm sorry, folks. As the acting chair tonight, I'd like to call to order the Tuesday, October 13th, 2020 Committee on Ways and Means. Annette, will you call the roll?
Yes. Steve Grande,
Present?
Mary Kate Murin, Max Starks, Vicky Kraus,
Yes.
Eric Hagopian, Maurice Lindsay,
Yes.
Jeff Sattler,
Yes.
and Janae McDonald.
Yes, present.
Thank you.
Briefly for trustees, I wanted to be sure I reintroduced our interim CFO, Edmund Rutkowski. Again, thrilled to have Ed in the seat. He comes to us, if you had a chance to see his bio that I sent you by way of Pratt Institute. He was Vice President of Administration and Chief Financial Officer for 22 years, if I'm not mistaken. Really appreciate, you'll get to know him over the next months. We are in search right now for our next VP of Administration and CFO. And Ed has been a wonderful, steady, sage presence for us. And again, I just wanted to be sure he had the proper introduction to this committee in particular. So welcome, Ed. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
One small thing, and then I'll turn it back to the agenda. Ed, I should have also noted, is himself a trustee for a college in Delaware College of Art and Design, if I'm not mistaken. So he knows the work from multiple perspectives, dare I say. So again, thanks.
If I may mention, I'm also
Go ahead, Ed, sorry.
Yeah, I'm treasurer also of the Board of Trustees for Delaware College of Art and Design.
Excellent.
Can
Okay.
we
So,
move on now?
yeah, we can move right on. Thanks, Steve.
Okay. For some reason, my sound is going in and out. Are you able to hear me still?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. All right, so for the fiscal year 2020 audit update, Michael Cosgrove from O'Connor and Drew PC will give that.
Thank you. So we went through in detail with the audit committee. It was myself and Lisa DeGiusto, who's the audit manager with us. We'll just try to kind of hit the highlights for you folks. Any questions, please feel free to let me go. But again, I'll try to kind of keep it brief and really just kind of hit some of the finer points. There's really two audit reports that go into these financial statements. As a financial statement audit, as well as an internal control report. There was an unmodified opinion on the financial statement audit. That's essentially a clean opinion. That's the opinion you want. As far as the internal controls, there were no significant deficiencies or material weaknesses noted. So basically that's a standard language audit report. If something comes to our attention during the testing, then we would modify the report, but that's not the case. Couple of significant transactions this year. One is there was actually a restatement from the FY19 financial statements related to the net OPEB liability. So for you folks that don't know, OPEB is other post-employment benefits, namely health insurance for state employees. That calculation is done at the state level. It's audited by another firm, KPMG, and that firm ended up recalling and revising its opinion. So the state, they then issued a new report, and it's reflected in these financial statements. But again, that's for the prior year. It was about a $145,000 change, if I remember correctly, to the unrestricted net position of the college. The other significant transaction, some of you may be familiar with some of the CARES Act funding and the higher education relief funds. About $990,000 was passed through the college through to students as emergency grant aid. And the only other comment or thing to really mention at this time, I think, you know, from everything I've seen from my end and from what Lisa's seen, we kind of want to highlight Dorothy's efforts in this. Going through an audit isn't easy, really for anyone. And full disclosure, we try to make it as easy as we can with them. But again, obviously we're requesting a lot of documents, a lot of analysis, there's a lot of follow-up questions. And, as far as getting things timely, getting back to us, really staying on top of it, adding in that it's remote and we're not on site to really sit down in a room and go through it, add that on top of it. We were just really impressed with the effort and everything she gave to us. Again, kind of the timeliness of everything. And we wouldn't be here today with the financial statements where they're at without her putting forth her contributions. So.
Well done, Dorothy. Thank you.
Thank you. And likewise, Mike and Lisa, you made it very easy. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we ready to?
Let me offer a bit of context, Steve, for the broader Ways and Means Committee. So a couple things to just put a fine point on and be sure the trustees here. So there is what's called the component units. So there is the Assistance Corporation, that is the tech park across the street. Their financials are discrete. They are audited separately, but they too also have a unmodified opinion. This would be what we call a clean opinion. So I appreciate that. And if there are any questions, we can certainly tackle those. I also wanted to give note to two things. One is, as Mike mentioned, OPEB and pension. That STIC is perhaps the only community college that has been able to accommodate that from a net positive position. In other words, when we talk about reserves as an institution, the audited term, if I'm not mistaken, is unrestricted net position. And according to our audited financials, that position is 10.2 million at the conclusion of fiscal year 20. So keep that in mind when people talk about reserves. How much is the actual number? According to our auditor, it's 10.2 million. And again, that's a position of help, especially in the year or two that we have in front of us. So again, Mike, I don't know if there's other context that'll be helpful for our trustees to understand, but just how unusual and distinctive it is given the way pension is handled and OPEB is handled, if you want to comment on that.
Yeah, I mean, really, Springfield Tech is one of, if not the only community college with a positive unrestricted net position in the state. And again, that the way that net OPEB and the pension liabilities have been kind of driven down and allocated have really negatively impacted some of the other schools, but Springfield Tech has been able to kind of, I want to say weather the storm, but to be able to really still be in a position where it's a positive net position. And again, as you alluded to, I think, whether it's the next 6, 24 months, whatever that may be, I agree. I think, it's something to have in the back of your minds as, what those reserve numbers are and what you may need.
Thanks.
John, anything else?
I think we're good.
All right, so there is a motion to be read. Is this one of the trustees want to read the motion before us? I have it in front of me if you'd like me to read it. Okay. Why don't I read the background and then the motion? The college is required to submit the audited financial statements to the Office of the State Comptroller and the Office of the State Auditor by specified deadlines. Typically, the deadline to submit the financial statements is prior to the Board of Trustees meeting, requiring the college to submit a draft report. By allowing the Ways and Means Committee to have the authority to approve financial statements and audits, the college will be able to provide the final version of the audited financial statements to the necessary state agencies by the required deadlines. The STIC Board of Trustees authorized the Committee on Ways and Means to approve mandatory and annual financial statements and audits on October 26th, 2012. The motion reads that the Springfield Technical Community College Board of Trustees Committee on Ways and Means, pursuant to the provision of Section 22, Chapter 15A, approved the fiscal year 2020 financial statements and audit as presented. Is there a second to the motion?
I'll second that.
Jeff Sattler. All right, we'll take a vote. All those in favor? Annette, can you take a roll call vote?
Yes. Steve Grande,
Yes.
Mary Kate Murin, Max Starks, Vicky Kraus,
Yes.
Eric Hagopian, Maurice Lindsay,
Yes.
Jeff Sattler,
Yes.
and Janae McDonald.
Yes.
Thank you.
John, it looked like, did you want to say something before? I thought I saw you. Okay.
What's that?
With that, the motion passes. And next up would be our fiscal year 2021 budget detail.
I'm going to turn this section over to Ed Rakowski, right, our interim CFO, but in particular Dorothy Unger, our interim controller, and Jason Cohen, our senior director of finance and budgets. Dorothy and Jason, if you want to take the floor.
Sure, thank you. Per Trustee McDonald's request at the last Ways and Means meeting, there was a question as to the official language of the CARES Act and the GEAR funds. So we took some of the language from the award letter that we received and incorporated it into this presentation. Are there any questions that anyone has about that language? All right, great, thank you. I will turn cash flows over to Dorothy at this point.
Thank you, Jason. Going to go to the next slide. Okay, great. So we currently have approximately $3 million at TD Bank right now. Cash flow projection assumptions have been somewhat modified from what we reported last month. So if you recall, last month we were forecasting a 17% reduction in enrollment for the fall and a 15% reduction in enrollment for the spring, with a 10% 9C reduction. And that left us with a potential need to divest $1.2 million in spring of 2021. Well, now that things have, the enrollment projections are becoming more dialed in, we've got a 16% reduction in enrollment for the fall and a 15% reduction in enrollment for spring. We removed the 9C reduction from our projections because we wanted to focus on what we actually know. We won't know the 9C reduction until possibly sometime in the spring. So until we have more information, we figured we were just going to take that off the table for right now, but we know what could happen in the event of a 10% reduction. So assuming at this point in time, assuming no 9C cut, assuming enrollment trends hold, we are expecting to have the year end at approximately $400,000 for a cash balance. We'll have to revisit as more information unfolds. But I would like to add and call out that this is the first summer that we haven't had to divest. Typically we need a little bit of a bridge to get us to that first financial aid disbursement. We haven't had to do that this year, and it's actually been very refreshing and good to not have to do that. So I just wanted to call that out. Any questions at all?
Yes, it's Vicki Kraus. I was going to follow up on that. I assume that the reason we didn't divest is because we had so much cash come in as part of the CARES Act and other funding that came into the college related to COVID.
So the CARES Act that came in, it went right to students. We have not called down any of the institutional as of yet. We will be doing that soon because the institutional expenses are there, but we have not called that down.
But we have the cash, correct?
It is awarded to us, but it is not reflected here. The institutional is not reflected in the actuals here. We have not received it yet.
And how much is that?
So that the institutional, that was about 1.1 mil.
So we're in a positive cash position without having to bridge before the institutional portion of the CARES Act funding. Was it related to other monies that were received, or how did we end up in that position in what might have been, some of us thought our most difficult year?
We started the fiscal year at a higher cash balance than we did last time around, which I credit that to the management of the funds. Our expenses were decreased from last year.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Anything else? Okay. Go back to Jason for the budget update.
Sure. We can just scroll down to the revenue and spending report, please. A few more down. Perfect. Thank you. Can we go back a few? Thanks. I'm sorry. 2 more forward. All right. One more. Good. All right. Sorry about that. Thank you, everybody. So I'm not going to talk about all of the variances, but one thing that I wanted to talk about was that the state support is uncertain this year. As you know, last month we projected the 9C cut when we were doing our forecast. This year, or I should say this month, we decided to put two projections in there. One with just the straight 4% reduction that we've recognized so far. And the other projection has an additional 9C cut of 5%. So that's one variance that you might have recognized from last month compared to this month. If you all have any questions, I would be happy to answer those for you.
So which one of these, in terms of, conversation, should we focus on? The one without the 9C reductions, which is more of what we know? It really includes the actual fall and spring enrollment, where we expect enrollment to fall, and then the 4% appropriation reduction, but not what we don't know. So it would be the third set of columns.
Yes, that's exactly it. And that ties in with Dorothy's cash flows as well. So the enrollment projections are the same on both.
Perfect. Thank you.
You're welcome. All right. If there's no other questions, we can move on to the next section. Yes.
This is Jeff. I do have a question on the net income or net loss. It's 496. Is that the one I'm looking at for year end 21?
So the 496 is that's in the red, that 496. That is if we included the 5% 9C. So that's a speculative figure. If we were to look at that forecast one, which is the column section over to the left, that's positive 845, and that's with what we know right now with just the 4% reduction in the appropriation.
And that's with a 15% reduction in spring. So we're looking at that.
Yep,
so
yep.
That's the variance. Okay,
Exactly.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And in that analysis, are there any other assumptions that you just want to draw our attention to, or any other line items, have any large assumptions related either to enrollment or, cuts or anything else? Or is this pretty much what the year looks like based on what we know today without other major assumptions being in either revenue or expenses?
Right. Yeah. I mean, based the assumption, well, we know that fall enrollment is at about 16%, so that's pretty safe. Just following the trend into spring with 15%, that's a pretty safe assumption as well. So those are the big assumptions that we've made. I can speak to something that we just found out last Friday, is that we got another $159,000 for student support from a gear grant. So that's nice, that we'll be able to give a little bit more aid to our students. But those are the main assumptions that we've made so far.
Okay, great. Thank you.
So what you're looking at then is we won't be looking to take any money out of our $10,200,000 liquidity.
Correct. Assuming that, we don't get that 9C cut, if the 9C cut's on the table, it could go in either direction.
Yep.
Any other discussion on this? John, shall we move on to your perspective?
Yep. And again, I'll sort of pick up that right there. I want to be sure Ways and Means knows just how helpful and diligent both Dorothy and Jason have been through this process, as we have now tightened things up in terms of showing you as close to a reality as we can. Obviously, there's some forecasting and projection in there, but it's been I would say this, to sustain a 16% decline in fall enrollment is pretty spectacular. And yet the fact that we can do that and show if somehow, some way we weather this year without further cuts from the state, it shows you the kind of belt tightening and difficult decision-making the college has gone through on the front end, that we won't have to contend with that during the year, I think is a testament to a certain kind of grit and foresight by this institution. And again, it's been really helpful to have Dorothy in her role and Jason in her role really dial this in. So my gratitude for them. If we jump off of that, knowing again, the college has some resources to draw from if needed, that we can continue to weather this very difficult year. Really what I wanted to open up was a conversation with this committee in particular about the 2022 budget and how this committee in particular would like to go about and be part of that process. And in particular, how we can take any surprise or the guesswork out of capital and infrastructure planning, and particularly Building 20. A few things related to that. So typically for new trustees, we would bring forward our first draft of the fiscal year budget in March of next year. We would bring forward a second draft in April, and then we would seek your final approval in May, because we often liked to avoid coming right up against the fiscal year. Even though, for example, this year, trustees voted on a final budget in June, we try to give June as the leeway if needed. What we don't have, and it's, I think, been readily apparent, is we don't have a building and grounds committee. And the bylaws don't exactly call for that of the trustees, but we could create an ad hoc committee that really focuses on capital and infrastructure. Because as we've heard time and time again, the college carries significant deferred maintenance issues, $315 million. Building 20, right, is pushing $70 million. And we are really trying to firm up a plan where we do move things forward, where we go across the street to the tech park and we vacate Building 20. I want to be sure that, again, we have a ramp, a runway, an avenue to engage on that with trustees. And so I'm keen to get your feedback on that. And Owen, by the way, we haven't talked about IT yet. And I want to do well by our new CIO and making sure that IT is certainly part of the capital and infrastructure planning as well.
So, John, I'm not sure what you're asking. Are you asking us if we should change the time frame in the 2022 budget preparation process, or are you asking for a different ad hoc subcommittee to be formed? What?
Yeah, it's in some ways, if at the very least, if this committee can think about those things, knowing what we've contended with this year, it doesn't seem like business as usual will work. Whether we need more meetings or whether we need an additional committee, I guess I ask for you to think about that and then provide some perspective. And again, it doesn't have to be tonight. This is the first time, right, I'm trying to bring the conversation forward. But we have a November Ways and Means. We certainly have an October and a November full board meeting where I'll ask the same question of the trustees. There's just going to be too much when it comes to facilities and capital in the year ahead. I just want to kind of gauge how much this body wants to try to take that on, whether we, again, might need another ad hoc committee. And frankly, I can already offer that certainly in January, we'll want to, whether we call it a draft budget or not, we'll want to already be talking about the parameters. Things like we're right back to forecasting and planning, enrollment, capital needs, fee increase or not for students, things like that.
So I guess my recommendation would be that next month's meeting, Mac will probably be back as the chair, so he'd be present for that conversation, and that hopefully we will also have some more clarity around any other decisions that might come up from the ad hoc committee on the program discontinuations that would dovetail into some of those necessary conversations about capital. So I guess I think it's a good thing to put out there, but I think we wait until next month when Mac is available, and perhaps we also know a little bit more about where we're going with some of these other decisions that could impact any potential spending or capital planning.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think that really helps too, in the sense of that ad hoc committee is going to be such a helpful forum, and that may be the vehicle, quite frankly, where we keep these conversations going even after the presentation in 2 weeks. So I do hear that. Other trustees, just want to sort of take the temperature and check. Yep, go ahead, Jeff. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Doctor. So does it have to be trustees, or can there be other people outside of being a trustee to be on this ad hoc committee? Because I know that we have some experienced people like a Paul Stelzer or others that might be valuable in looking at this, or is it just the trustees being involved?
No, great point. We certainly have other people like our investment subcommittee. We have members of the public, if you will, who are part of that. We can check the bylaws and find that out. What I know is Paul Stelzer, who works for Appleton Corporation, which is the management company that runs the tech park. He and the incoming board chair for the STCC, Assistance Corporation, are going to be invited to the November full trustee meeting so that our trustees can hear more about the project from the perspective of the tech park. So there are certainly those types of things that we're definitely attending to, Jeff. Now, whether we have a different work group where, frankly, this is why you have administrators at the college, is to really work on these things and do this week in and week out. I just want to be sure that, again, we know we have formal mechanisms to work in trustees.
So I'm going to follow up with this, John. So we're looking at spending $2,475,000 in the budget this year, and it's probably not a lot of new projects. It's more of finishing the previous ones. It'd be nice to see, say, the last 5 years, what we spent, what we used it for, what the needs are, something a part of the next Board of Trustee meeting for us to get our arms around what you're looking for us to analyze. Because I can recall before the COVID hit, we were trying to lobby to get the state to appropriate money for Building 20 to really get that completed. And I think that's on the back burner, I would assume. So just trying to get my arms around what we're spending on facilities. I know it's a lot lower than we originally wanted to see, where we are in our spending and how much do we need to spend based on your 5-10 year plan that we were starting to formulate.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And so for again, this committee, you'll see what I hope is a much clearer picture on that at the ad hoc presentation. Again, there's a lot of facilities considerations that have gone into the program discontinuation. So we'll talk about that. We also have a 5-year capital plan, and we have a campus master plan. Those live in board packs, so you have access to those, which give us the sort of pathway. One of the things that we have to wrangle with is the enormity of it. Like I'll give you an example. We have typically year over year dialed in that 3.1 million, right, of our own operating money for facilities projects. What we know is that that's not enough. And again, I'll talk a little bit more about this at the ad hoc. So the question though is, how do we try to accelerate what have been these deferred maintenance issues that have stacked up on us? Yeah, we'll want to do a full accounting, if you will, for where are our projects and what's the order of priority. And in our being sure that trustees are clear on our money and that state DCAM money.
Yep.
Other comments from trustees or observations?
Yeah, this is Maurice. I'm just curious as to should we establish the ad hoc committee to look at these deferred maintenance thing that you're proposing? Apart from the obvious two big ones, the Building 20 and the Tech Park, are there other things that would fall under the scope of this?
Yes, and I guess if if trustees can dust off that campus master plan, it is fairly recent, and that's a really, really important template for us because it does walk out priorities and it gives a time frame for them.
Okay.
So in addition to Building 20 being right at the top of the list, that is our School of Health. That is a critical set of programs that are high demand and relatively higher enrolled. We have to preserve those. Really, this move is a stabilization move to vacate that. Underneath that are a set of other buildings that are cause for concern. Let's take one that we've not necessarily talked about, management and the trustees. Building 32 is where our HVAC energy systems program is. That has 8.5 million in deferred maintenance needs on it right now. That's mentioned, that's noted, that's prioritized in the campus master plan. We've not necessarily put dollars to that though. So those are the types of things that we can certainly look at the ad hoc in 2 weeks, and then take a look at, well, which direction do we head from there? You'll also, by the way, I should add to that, thank you for that, Maurice. You'll see things like the automotive building. Automotive building itself has $6 million worth of deferred maintenance needs. So again, I'm going to try to bring all of this together and make sure that we're really clear on some of these really difficult, really costly facilities concerns.
Mm-hmm.
And I will, Vicky, to that point too, connect with Mac. His leadership on this committee and his fiscal outlook is invaluable to the college. So I'll definitely be following up with him and gauging from him how again he wants to make sure this committee is contributing, not just participating to the budget planning for FY 2022. Are there questions from the? Let me work in Ed. I see his hand up, and then I'll take any questions the committee may have. Go ahead, Ed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if you don't mind, just a little bit from my experience, I'd like to suggest that you really do want to set up, if it even is just an ad hoc committee. It helps to have a committee. They can also call guests. They can invite people to come to give them opinions and get some estimates and all the rest. If you have a master plan and it's a relatively new one, I would encourage that the institution follows that master plan, gets a committee going to make the work of all of the trustees a lot easier, because some of the work that can take place at the committee level would be in depth enough so that things could be shared and they could be brought forward in terms of recommendations. So I urge you to really do consider that as trustees. And I say that as being a trustee myself and having faced a lot of deferred maintenance issues. A building that has deferred maintenance to a certain level, unless you really address that, you almost, if you don't do it soon enough, you will lose the building because it continues to deteriorate. In particular, if the envelope of the building is in bad shape, then what happens is you will get infiltration of water, which is very difficult to deal with and does destroy a building a lot more. So I do encourage you to think about that, and an ad hoc committee would be, I think, very useful to this particular institution. It will help set directions, it will help bring out issues, and it will help get some perhaps needed advice, and some of it comes free of charge because people who are interested will come in and we'll try to help you.
Appreciate that. So any questions? Budget, audits, finance, planning from the committee? Okay, I think that I'll turn it back over to you, Steve. You're on mute, Steve.
Is there any old business to bring before the committee? Any new business? Date of the next meeting is going to be November 9th, 2020. It's the date of the next Ways and Means Committee meeting. And with that, I will take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Is there a second? Annette, will you take a roll call vote?
Yes. Steve Grande,
Yes.
Mary Kate Murin, Max Starks, Vicky Kraus,
Yes.
Erica Gopian, Maurice Lindsay,
Yes.
Jeff Sattler,
Yes.
and Jenny McDonald.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great night. Thank you, Steve. Much appreciated.